The White Sox have reached the midway point of the season, and there's actually some good things to discuss, although they're still bad, and we need to discuss that too on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press, and thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode, subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you haven't done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Well, instead of grading every player at the season's mathematical halfway mark, I want to celebrate who and what has been good in the first segment, and then who or what has been terrible in the second segment. And then let's wrap up the show with a suggestion from Chicago Tribune's Paul Sullivan on how the White Sox potential new stadium should involve a retractable roof. And this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. All right, so while this season at least has a better vibe, the White Sox are still on pace to win somewhere between 52 games if you do the simple take 26 times 2 math type projection. Fangraphs, though, also has the White Sox on pace to win 58 games. So while it feels much better to not be anywhere close to probably finishing with, say, 41 wins, it's still shaping up to be a season where the White Sox do not even win the factory standard settings of 60 games. Because remember, the old saying goes, you're guaranteed to win 60, you're guaranteed to lose 60 in Major League Baseball. It's what you do with the other 42 that counts. So it looks like the White Sox can't even hit the factory standards. So I could grade each player after 81 games, but when you have a team possibly falling short of the old saying of winning those guaranteed 60 games, do grades really matter? Because in the end, still, technically, if you look at it, a terrible season. Obviously, in the context of the White Sox, hey, it is improvement. And in the big picture, you got to like where things are going. So what I want to do is kind of look back in terms of who has been good and who has been bad, along with what has been bad and who has been bad as well. And when it comes to why I'm doing that is it's more of not just, hey, let's recap all the episodes I've done. It's more of, hey, let's look at it through this lens, because when it comes to just okay or raised floor players, the White Sox don't have a ton of those guys right now. I mean, guys that I would just put in, hey, they're okay, they're doing decent contributions. They've also had some bad contributions, but for the most part, you can live with them. They're decent. Andrew Benintendi and Lenyn Sosa. You put them right there. I talked about how maybe Lenyn Sosa could even be a value player in yesterday's episode. But for the most part, if Andrew Benintendi is actually hitting home runs and on a decent run, the White Sox offense is pretty good. When he's struggling, the White Sox offense has also struggled. And I'm not saying he's the linchpin, but look at the correlation. Like on Wednesday's victory, he crushes a home run. Hey, the White Sox win 7-3. Does a bunch of offers. The White Sox lose to the Diamondbacks. That type of stuff. I've just said, like, if he can at least provide some offense, the White Sox offense tends to hum a little bit better, and especially if Lenyn Sosa provides some offense. But otherwise, for the most part, when you look at what guys are doing, it's either been, in the context of, hey, these guys are impressive, or, hey, man, oh boy, these guys are bad. So in the first segment, let's look at who has been impressive and what has been impressive and what has been good. And it's clearly the top two is obviously Miguel Vargas' turnaround and Shane Smith's April and May. And one of them likely will get the All-Star nod, even though Vargas' average is still in the 230 range. And there are those that are still moving the goalpost because they were probably the ones that were like, oh man, that was a terrible trade when he came to the White Sox in the South Side last season. Another figurative dollar and mentioning, the season last year. But again, in my defense, I did say I was willing to give him a second chance, and I'm no longer moving the goalpost on him. And the other reason, if you're going to use old school average as a judgment, the reason why it's in the 230 range is that he was so below 200 in late April that when he made his swing change, that's how much his swing change has impacted. I think he was at 140 or 150 and 160. He was really below. I think he did raise his average by like 100 points. So just imagine if he was like at 190, his average would be well higher right now. All-star worthy. And then if you look at his OPS, it is 735, and he does have 10 home runs. So while it's fringe all-star, it is worthy of probably being the White Sox representative. And remember, for those that are about to jump in the comments, every team gets an all-star representative. And also, if you cite, he's having a terrible June, at least average-wise, well, it's because he now has to adjust to trying to hit the rare pitches he actually gets. He's got to time up those few strikes that he's going to see, because think about how impressive his hot streak was after making that swing adjustment. The Mets, one of the best pitching staffs in baseball, just decided we're not going to throw you anything. We're just not going to pitch to you. We're going to put you on base. And that's what teams are trying to do. They have no problem walking Miguel Vargas because they don't want him to get hot again. Or they're just trying to give him some junk and see if he'll swing at it. So he's got to learn to stay disciplined. And then, yes, he's got to learn to square up the few pitches he gets. And that's another adjustment that he has to make to the adjustment. And Shane Smith, yes, he's had 2 rough starts, but that should not take away from his impressive April and May. And again, I talked about it on Monday, or it was Tuesday. He might just be running out of gas. But Vargas going from a potential trade bust to core player, and Smith being a viable starter out of the Rule 5, that is tremendous. And then Edgar Caro and Chase Mydroth coming up from the minor leagues and proving they belong. Clearly, that's great. Because now you got some core guys that you can move forward with. You add in Davis Martin before he went on the 15-day IL. He was pitching well. That kick change was impressive. Although maybe that kick change caused the muscle aches in his forearm. But you got these young pieces that you can move forward with. Mike Vassell has been so impressive. And think about that. He went from being a Rule 5 pick that the Rays took off the Mets organization and then decided, hey, this guy can't make our roster. Couldn't make the Rays, which is a decent standard. Gets waived. The White Sox at him. And I think the thinking was, well, okay, we can just hide him in long relief. We need some arms. We've got all these injuries. Maybe, there's nothing wrong with kicking the tires on him. And if he doesn't work out, well, we, send him back to the Mets. But we'll stash him in long relief. Not only has he been very impressive in long relief, you definitely know that he's got that, at least the floor. He's got that role as the long reliever. He's also shown he can handle high leverage situations. And maybe you might want to give him a shot at a starter. See, this is the time to try, especially with all the injuries in the rotation. The other thing that's been really good is you've gotten the White Sox being in more games. Just a third of the games have been decided by 5 runs or more. Now, as I discussed on yesterday's episode, and I got an email from an everydayer, and I appreciate it. I think the thing that's been missing, I think what some people are missing is hey, you keep contradicting yourself. If you look at it in the lens of, in the big picture, yes, things are looking good, I think. Be cautious. But if you're looking at the lens of things you would like to still see happen this season, just the incremental progress you would still like to see happen this season, yeah, there's still some work to do, and I'll discuss that in the next segment. But the Garrett Crochet deal also produced not only Mydroth, but Kyle Teel and Winkelman Gonzalez getting to the big leagues. And Teel had 3 hits on Wednesday's win, and if he puts up more multi-hit games, I like his chances of being a core piece, and I'm almost ready to put him in a core piece. And in the next segment, you'll see I kind of did. And if Gonzalez can command more consistently, then the White Sox have a future higher leverage reliever. You add in Grant Taylor, throwing impressive heat, and showing he can handle high leverage situations, and you got to like where this bullpen is going. And then finally, Mike Tauchman has been a solid addition, providing professional at-bats. So through 81 games, hey, we finally got some good things to discuss, even though the record looks terrible. However, the Sox are still on pace to lose more than 100 games for the 3rd straight season, and you don't get there unless you got a lot of bad, which the team has had in the first 81 games. So let's discuss that after the break on Locked On White Sox. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize, hey, I want to be in the stands. And that's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. And Game Time makes that all possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Game Time has last-minute tickets and zone deals for big savings, like 10% off exclusive zone deals for the Cubs versus Cardinals game on July 6th. Okay, so it might be the Cubs, but hey, the White Sox, they're out of town. And if, that day, and if you want to still catch Major League Baseball, why not get a deal on tickets and root against the rival Cubs? Although it means you might have to cheer for the just as despicable Cardinals. Not a huge fan of that team either, but there's nothing wrong with saving some money if you want to hate watch. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right, so let's recap. What has been bad for the White Sox during the first 81 games? The overall hitting with runners in scoring position. Surprisingly, actually, the defense. Even though it looks like the White Sox have been playing clean baseball, they're the team with the fourth most errors in the league. And it kind of has gone up a little bit as Chase Maidroth has been asked to play shortstop. That's one reason why, the belief is maybe he's not going to be a long-term shortstop. I think he's been doing okay. But still, when you got, having a ball bounce off his head, that you realize, oh, wait, they still do have a lot of errors. Although, maybe it's a little bit surprising when I saw that because there's just been less White Sox doing White Sox type things this season. The bullpen in the clutch moments has been still terrible. Team is 4-20 in one-run games. And I think they're I think they only have like 9 wins, if I remember my math correctly, in games decided by 2 runs or less. You had a lot of bad veterans like Bryce Wilson. The idea that Mike Clevenger could be a closer, that was a terrible idea. That type of stuff. But it's really easy to point out what has been the biggest, just terrible thing this season, and it's Luis Robert Jr. And I know I've been ragging on him, but I came to the realization, why have I been ragging on him so much? It's because his terrible season this year is going to have profound effects on this rebuild. Because remember, the hope was he gets through April playing mostly in the cold Midwest healthy. That was the hope. Because he even said, his body doesn't like playing in cold weather. He goes on a tear in May, and then hopefully he can be traded by Memorial Day or even in June for prospects who can help accelerate this rebuild's timeline. And that gamble has gone completely bust to the point where now you're definitely going to have to rely on the 2020, what you drafted in 2024 and even in 2023, and probably the next 2 drafts to infuse more core players. Because remember, Jerry is still owning this team until 2029 at the earliest. So it's unlikely he authorizes a major spending spree to cover the holes that still need to be filled in this build. I mean, Chris Getz could say, hey, money's eventually going to be spent. Okay, just like money was eventually spent in the last rebuild, but it wasn't enough. It's always like a self-imposed salary cap. It's limited financial resources when, if you want to be a big boy team in a big boy market like you are, it's got to be unlimited to add those core players that, again, that your draft or your international free agency can't do. So now that's why it's even more important. And if listen to the White Sox Talk podcast that Chuck Garfien recently did with Brian Bannister, he talked about it. Like, they definitely have to get better at international free agency because those are just extra potential star players that you can add to your system. But they definitely are now going to have to get much better in the draft and development. Why? Here's a visual for those on YouTube or in terms of guys I think have earned core status, or again, are down colors like Kyle Teal. So at catcher, I got Edgar Carroll, Kyle Teal. In the rotation, I put Davis Martin, Shane Smith, Sean Burke. You got Chase Maidroth. I would still prefer to be at second base rather than short. Sorry about that for those watching on YouTube. I had to quickly go answer the doorbell, so I had to hit the pause button. Anyways, so getting back to core, Chase Mydroth being second base, I think that's just where he's stronger defensively. Miguel Vargas, obviously, at third. But then think about this. I got question marks at first. I got question marks at short. I got question marks in left, center, and right. In terms of, and then I got 2 question marks in your starting rotation. I do have Lenine Sosa and Jonathan Cannon as wild cards, just because hopefully Jonathan Cannon does come back healthy, but he's still been so up and down. But again, maybe he might be the 5th starter. But again, does he get pushed out if Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith do reach the potential that we are all hoping that they reach? If that's the case, then I think you got to move him out. Although there's talk about trading Davis Martin. But again, I still like Davis Martin more. I just like Davis Martin's change a little bit better. And I like that Davis Martin's kick change is a knockout pitch, where Jonathan Cannon still lacks that knockout pitch. He can get strike 1, strike 2. It's really hard for him to get strike 3. That type of stuff. But hey, if he can get a little bit better, maybe he gets added to that status, or maybe gets added to the bullpen. In the bullpen, I got Grant Taylor and Mike Vassell. And then that leaves you with, if my math is correct, you got to find 6 more relievers. And then I got 3 more bench because, Kyle Teal, Edgar Carroll, I see them splitting. So you're definitely needing to add pieces. Now, I'm just saying what you're seeing right now. Obviously, in the minor leagues, the 3 guys that I think have a very good shot at being not only added to this core, but stud players is Smith, Schultz, and then Brady Montgomery. I'm very confident in them, but there's still a ton of question marks. Shortstop, you could say, well, before you jump in the comments, what about Colson Montgomery? Yeah, he did hit 2 home runs yesterday for AAA Charlotte, but man, he still has to show consistency. That's what the front office has been saying. That's why he's not up. Remember, he was so bad that they had to pull him from game action and send him to Arizona for swing school. I know Caleb Bonamar and George Wilco, they have star talent. They're studs. They got studs written all over them, but you know what? They're still at low A, and they still have a long development road ahead of them. Just like Brady Montgomery probably still needs, I'd say, he might not be up until 2027. And yeah, you got Jarrell Perez and Jacob Gonzalez and William Bergola and Javier Mogulin and Sam Antonacci and Rico Nishida as potential infield options. Rico even in the outfield. But for example, like Rico, he's just, and again, I keep saying there's nothing wrong with this. But a lot of these guys are still just going to be raising your floor. And if you're going to point out, well, why didn't you put Brooks Baldwin there? He still has to show he can prove that he can hit in the show. He's at AAA. Maybe Corey Lee too is, if they run with the 3 catchers, maybe you do move eventually Kyle Teal to first base or outfield. But again, it sounds like they don't want to do that. It sounds like they want to basically alternate Caro and Teal catching because, it is kind of hard to ask your catcher to catch now for over 100 to 120 games, with the physical toll and that and all the stuff that needs to be done. So maybe they're going to split the reps and try to, find the at-bats, those extra at-bats, as I said, at DH. And maybe they entertain Teal possibly being a backup, but I don't think they've envisioned him that he's going to be the long-term solution at like first or right or left field, at least not right now. Brian Ramos, he's struggling at AAA. Pitching wise, too, maybe Shane Murphy and Tanner McDougal have the potential to be big league pitchers, Peyton Pallette as well in the bullpen. But there's still a ton of unknowns. So that's why Robert Jr. being on this huge struggle bus is not going to be able to yield talent that can alter the timeline, much like when the White Sox traded Garrett Crochet. Because now you're just hoping that you get something for him. Because, he still has some value because he can play defense and steal bases. But he went from being a guy that you could flip for impact players if he had just had a decent May or good May to now he's basically Billy Hamilton. That's what he is, folks. He steals bases and he plays defense. Billy Hamilton did the same thing. And they about hit the same. The only difference is Luis Robert Jr. at least had his career season, was making the All-Star team. And obviously I could point out, Josh Rojas and Vinny Capra being bad, but Rojas, you kind of had a feeling he was going to be bad considering how poor he played for the Mariners last year after April. But it still couldn't hurt to kick the tires on him, considering that they weren't spending any money on him or any money this last offseason. And Capra, again, as long as he's a late inning defensive replacement at short, I'm fine. But again, getting back to this question mark at first base with Andrew Vaughn being so awful to start the season to the point that, again, they traded him away, and Tim Elko just not being able to make contact. The Sox have to play one of those guys now every day if they have Miguel Vargas or Lenyn Sosa at first. Because if they have Lenyn Sosa at first, then Maedroth usually has to slide over to second. That means you got to probably play Vinny Capra at short. Or if you put Vargas at first, then you got to play Rojas at third. So again, the first base now being a hole is forcing the White Sox to have automatic outs in the lineup. And that's another thing that's just been really bad and why the lineup has struggled is you've got a lot of guys that have been just automatic outs. Well, one idea for proper utilization is if the White Sox do eventually build a new ballpark is put a retractable roof on it. And let's discuss the Chicago Tribune's Paul Sullivan's idea next on Locked On White Sox. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox wherever they get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms. Hope you got some fun weekend plans. Hope their weekend is fun, that type of stuff. Mine, I'm going to obviously watch the Blackhawks NHL draft, since I also do run one of the Fansided's Blackhawks site. So I'll be watching that. And then I think I'm actually going down to Johnsburg to see my folks on Sunday. Well, anyways, I have been trying my best to not mention my time covering the Milwaukee Brewers or when I worked in their scoreboard operations. I do try to make a conscientious effort. Part of it is this is a White Sox podcast, but sometimes I do draw on that experience. And I can say the major benefit for the Brewers having a retractable roof at AmFam Field was not, well, hey, it can snow in April, so that way they make sure that there's baseball. They made sure to guarantee baseball will be played for 81 home games. Therefore, when you buy a ticket to see the Brewers, you know you're going to get baseball. That was actually the main reason that they put a roof on AmFam Field. It wasn't because, well, it's going to be cold in April and September. It was they found that a lot of the fans were coming in from out of the city, and they wanted to make sure if you were coming to a game that it wasn't going to be rained out or snowed out. So while playing without a roof is a tradition, and I can see old timers, the old schoolers saying, hey, baseball's meant to be played outside. You can get the best of both worlds with a retractable roof. That's what you get in places like Houston and Toronto and Seattle and Milwaukee. So I do hope if Justin Ishbia does privately finance a new stadium, like we're all hoping that he does, that's in Chicago, that he does consider a retractable roof. Although please add air conditioning, as that is the one thing AmFam Field does lack, is air conditioning. Although I've seen people make, I got a buddy who's on X formerly Twitter. He always makes that point. He's a Cub fan type thing, to Brewers fans. The roof is usually closed in April, May, and September when it does tend to get chilly and you don't need AC. The AC is only needed at AmFam when it's closed because of rain and it's a 90-degree day. Then yes, it is miserable. And I've heard Lawrence Holmes also make that point in the score. So that's just one thing. But having a retractable roof and AC on a scorcher is a reason Chicago Tribune sports columnist Paul Sullivan is suggesting the Sox potential new park have one in the first place. Here's some highlights of his work I want to share. And this is on chicagotribune.com. There's nothing wrong with admitting you prefer comfort over extreme cold or heat. Even as we've been typecast as a city that loves our Bears weather a holdover from a few cold weather wins during the Super Bowl season 40 years ago. This year has seen a cold spring turn into a hot summer almost overnight. Wrigley Field was a sweat box over the weekend with an umpire and Seattle Mariners pitcher leaving Saturday's game because of the heat. It was less worrisome Monday at Wrigley Field where the White Sox took on the Arizona Diamondbacks with the sun down. But I still felt for Sox players taking infield practice, remembering former first baseman John Kruk's clubhouse rant in 1995 when manager Terry Bevington ordered pregame infield practice during a similar heat wave. The only way for fans to escape Monday was to hit the showers, and a long line of kids waited to jump into the left field shower during the game, gleefully soaking themselves while the White Sox got pummeled 10-0. Climate change has brought more tropical weather than ever to Midwestern cities, and despite what the stable genius and his administration want to believe, it's not going to reverse course anytime soon. That's why it's imperative for future White Sox owner Justin Ishbia to rip up the current renderings of the proposed ballpark in the South Loop and commission an architect to draw up a new one with a retractable roof. Now, I'm not going to argue climate change as a reason for a roof. Okay? Because, I don't want to get into that. I try to keep politics out of the sports, even though I kind of talked about social issues yesterday with Kettle Marte. I try to keep that out. I'm going to be pro retractable roof because let's guarantee baseball gets played. Instead of starting most games in a rain delay when it's clear the White Sox should have called the game because Jerry wants his concession and parking money. I mean, that's the old joke that runs around. There could be like a tornado potentially about to touch down near Wrigley Field and major thunderstorms for 2 hours predicted. But Jerry's going to make sure that game is going to start in a rain delay because he wants you to park your car and still come in and get a hot dog. But instead of pulling off this farce or that scam, why not just have a roof? And you'll never need to pull it off again. You can guarantee 81 games. People are going to come to the stadium. I mean, obviously, right now it's a hardcore, but if you get better, people will come to the stadium. They know the baseball game's going to be played, and they will spend their hard-earned money on a hot dog and maybe the park. And that's why having a roof does have a major return on investment just because you guarantee a game will be played. You will actually guarantee that people might not be like, you know what, I'm not going to bother getting in my car on the L. I'll just eat the cost of this ticket. Some will do that. Instead, they'll be like, hey, yeah, I can go. And I like what Sullivan added. If the Sox are realistic, they would admit most of their fans go to games only when the team is winning. And even then, they usually wait until the weather is tolerable. A retractable roof, like the ones built by the Milwaukee Brewers, Houston Astros, and Texas Rangers, would fix one of those problems. A new owner in Ishbia might fix both. Would White Sox fans accept a retractable dome? A former player told me once they get used to it. They love it. Quote, every new ballpark constructed should have a retractable roof, he said. Not just because it's too hot, but for concerts and events in the winter to make it pay off. Before Monday's game, I asked rookie pitcher Grant Taylor, who played in a jungle-like humidity at LSU, and he thought of the Sox moving into a retractable dome ballpark down the line. Taylor had just experienced 2 such parks in Houston and Toronto. Quote, I thought it was cool in Toronto, he said of the Rogers Center. I liked it better with the roof open, but yeah, when we were in Houston, it was raining one of those days, and it was so nice to put the dome over the field and still play baseball. That's huge. You look at the St. Louis series in Chicago when we had to cancel a game and then have to use all of our relief arms in a doubleheader the next day. I think it would be pretty sweet. I prefer a stadium that's open on a good day, but if it's raining or 100 degrees outside, it's nice to have a dome, end quote. And that's basically what you want to do. Make your customers comfortable too. Again, if it is, I know some people, it's still sunny. If it's 95 degrees and muggy, I rather would sit in an air-conditioned stadium. I mean, again, I get the complaint of Miller Park, whereas compared to Houston, where they air-condition that sucker. So I get that. Or again, in Arizona. But again, you just want to make sure that you guarantee yourself baseball, that you're not playing these unnecessary doubleheaders and that type of stuff. So yes, I would love if Justin Ishbia is going to take over the team someday with the expectation that he fully funds a new stadium on his own pocket because he can afford it. Think big, Justin, and guarantee us baseball with a retractable roof. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'll be back on Monday with another Minor League Monday report and just to go over how the White Sox did in that series against the Giants. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding who's been good and who's been bad during the 81 games of this season so far, and then the White Sox potential new stadium having a retractable roof. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at ToddJDub or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at LockedOnWhiteSox@gmail.com. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. See you Monday.